Hello, this is the Beyond the Pale show. I am Keyshawn Wade,
And I am Laura McIntyre.
and thank you for being here with us. This is week 3 of our podcast. Yeah, and we are coming to you to talk about to continue the conversation that we had last week about Project 2025, where we mostly just gave a summary. But we kind of wanted to get more in depth with kind of what it means for Flint specifically. Again, we gave a summary. We kind of touched on some aspects of Flint and kind of what this means locally for us, because this is like a federal, state, and local um, decision making thing. But yeah, we just wanted to get into that a little bit more in depth, and kind of as a community put together um, some understanding and some knowledge around what we can do to fight against it.
Yeah, and we kind of wanted to make those connections between what has happened in the past to what is happening now to moving forward into the future so that we can be more proactive than reactive and keep building on the momentum of community action. Last week we had the members of the Democracy Defense League here. The Democracy Defense League was formed slightly before the water crisis to counteract the financial emergency manager law. And that is something that we actually really need to delve into, the way that it's connected to Project 2025, the way that it's connected to what has transpired in Flint, to the water crisis, and to implications beyond. Just briefly, financial emergency manager law takes over a municipality or a school district if it's deemed financially insoluble or struggling. It's very loosely defined and allows the governor um, complete jurisdiction to appoint a non-elected official to become the financial emergency manager to make unilateral decisions, again, for a municipality or a school district, including dissolving union contracts or eliminating union, just making them null and void. Um, and this person is not accountable to anybody except the governor, not to citizens, to voters, to city council, not even to the mayor. The mayor is basically just kicked out of the city. And so it strips places of their democracy, of their democratic rights and self-determination. Um, so I'm not going to, there's a lot we could say about that, and we are going to say a lot about that, but I just wanted to put that out there because there are connections between some of the things that are proposed in Project 2025 and some parallels between, disenfranchising. And I think one of the things we'll be focusing on is disenfranchising whom. It doesn't disenfranchise everybody. It's very particular and has some very distinct and disturbing patterns.
So, great intro. Where do we go from here? So, I think what we should do, I think we should start off with kind of stating, you know, we are a community in the 10th year of a water crisis. And that water crisis has continued because none of our demands have been met. Um, in
Well,
the
it almost even hasn't been acknowledged
Right,
as a water crisis.
right. So there's been this really lack of accountability
And denial.
and denial that has taken place um, over the last, I would say, well, since the very beginning. But I would say that there has been a movement to deny uh, the severity of the Flint water crisis, to deny the reality of the Flint water crisis over the past. I would say I first started seeing like a lot of it in 2016, 2017. What would you say?
Yes, in terms of the water crisis. However, as we were alluding to the Democracy Defense League, it did start before the water crisis because it was addressing the financial emergency manager law. So I remember 2011, 2012, leading up to that, we were saying if these economic, political, environmental conditions are not met or they're not addressed, then something bad is going to happen. And then lo and behold, you had babies getting exposed to lead or being lead poisoned. And it was, a lot of people mentioned that it almost seemed like it was out of a comic book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a villain came in and, poisoned babies. And in a way, that allowed us to get recognized in some senses. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible thing to have happened and to continue to happen. But on the other hand, without the eyes of the world, without attention being brought to that, we might have been exploited and um, taken advantage of even further.
Mm-hmm. Um, Sorry, I'll be right
What are
back.
you What are you laughing about?
Claire's here.
Oh, okay. So last week we did have members of the Democracy Defense League, and our fearless leader Claire McClinton, who is one of the co-founders, is downstairs, and we kind of always joke around. She's on Claire time, and that's perfectly fine with us. She was very instrumental in organizing a lot of the rallies and the recognition of what exactly the financial emergency manager law was and what the implications would be. So, and has never given up fighting. And it still is one of the demands that continues today. Because one of the things we were talking about last week is that um, this isn't just isolated to Flint, Michigan. This is a microcosm of what else is going around in the country. Every city should be concerned about its water. Every city should be concerned about its infrastructure. Every city should be concerned about the effects of neoliberal policies that have been happening over the past couple of decades and what it's doing to people. So we were talking earlier, I got the quote wrong, so maybe Keyshawn, what's the quote? Go ahead.
Flint. America is 1,000 Flints.
Yes. And we were also talking about Professor Andrew Highsmith's book, Demolition Means Progress, which we've used a lot. Thank God for that research because it really it gives us a lot of hard data and hard facts that are straight from the local archives that we wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So it's an incredible book. Um, it's not as easy to get a hold of as I would like. It's There have been blocks to it being published. So if you can find a copy of it, I encourage you to find a copy at a used bookstore, at your library, even ordering it online. Because we need to make sure that it continues to be published because there's a lot of opposition to that information being out there and being still available.
Right. And I think, and that quote comes from the book. I think he quotes somebody who said that in the book, kind of towards the end, about Flint or America being 1,000 Flints. And that just speaks to, I think, the significance of Flint in a lot of America's history, but also kind of the relationships between um, the people and the owners, the workers and the owners. And I think maybe I would love for y'all to hear from Miss Claire and hear her talk about this,
Mm.
because I'm learning from her, learning from such a wise community member. She will tell you, and she has gone on lengths about how the 1937 sit down strike right here in Flint had implications beyond what you think it had. It has implications to the very uh, social fabric that we exist in today. I mean, the 8 hour workday, the eight. I'll let Miss Claire take it from here. No. Oh, sorry. But yeah.
We need all the voices. Yeah. But absolutely. I mean, that's one thing that she's been very outspoken about, and other people in Flint too, because we're very proud of our history. We are the birthplace of General Motors, of the sit down strike. Now they, interestingly enough, they raised the factory where that strike took place, even though it should have been a historical monument. And that's also indicative of what happens in this city. You wake up one day and the building is just gone. Your history, your memory is just gone. We had um, oh, and I wish I could. I'm getting a blank. We had one of the first um, black owned funeral parlors in Michigan. And it was on, I believe, on University Avenue. And we were really trying to get it designated as a national monument. We had an art project going on there. We had Thanksgiving gatherings there. We showed movies, and then one day we just woke up and it was just gone. I mean, it had just vanished. It had been obliterated. And that's not uncommon around here. Talking about erasing our past, erasing our history. And, one of the reasons why it's important to keep telling these stories, to keep these memories going, and to get this information out there.
Right. Yeah, if we could have Miss Claire talk about the implications of the 1937 sit down strike, that would be wonderful.
Or anything, really.
Thank you for having me. And this is a wonderful opportunity for some alternative news and some real news and some real political education. And I just want to say that the 1937 sit down strike um, inspired the labor movement around the world, not just here in the United States. Um, and we'd like to talk about the workers who came from all over, but it's in particularly when we talk about African American history here in the city of Flint, we're talking about those who came from the South, and the labor movement was responsible for people to feel like they had come to the promised land. I mean, they came to got out the fields, got away from the terror of the Klan and all of that was going on in the South, and they came up here for good jobs, and the union movement was responsible for a lot of that. But I just want to say that we have to take time to study and look at the victories that we've had and how those victories impacted our community and indeed the world. Uh, the 37 sit down strike inspired workers all over the world to get into union organizing. So we got something to be proud of, and we have to turn to that and rely on that, because the challenges we facing in the future are monumental, and we got to look at that history and learn from those experiences to go on and fight what seems like we're in a bigger battle. I mean, we're talking about, we had a great podcast on Project 2025 last week, and we got to continue talking about that, because we went through the emergency managers. We went through the resultant, let me say that again, the emergency manager and the resultant water crises, the COVID, and all this stuff. And now it's up on us in Michigan to teach the rest of the nation what dictatorship looks like, because many of us was in the trenches, beating the pavement, pounding the pavement, going to different cities, getting signatures to overturn the emergency manager law. And Project 2025, as we've said, is like emergency manager on steroids. The decision by the United States Supreme Court to grant immunity to the president, that he cannot be criminally charged or held accountable for any crimes, it should that's just horrifying. Everybody should be scared to death that you could put someone in office and they can do whatever they want and they can't be charged. That's emergency manager on steroids.
We can tell you
Those are
all
the,
about that.
yes,
Right.
we ask us what that looks like.
An executive leader not being held responsible or accountable for actions taken while in office. Oh, Rick Snyder.
At the end of the day, it was made to be a fact, even though they went through the charade of courts and everything. But all the charges were dropped against the operatives.
Even the
Starting,
misdemeanors.
yes, they couldn't even hold them up to a misdemeanor. So
They
and
could, but they chose not to.
yes, well, it how it ties in with the president is that you can do whatever you want to the people and you can get away with it.
and
You don't have to be held accountable.
I just want to add, DDL and others who organized against the emergency manager law in 2011 and 2012, they were successful. Voters voted to repeal emergency manager law in November 2012, and repeat legislation was signed in by Rick Snyder and his administration 4 months later. If that's not dictatorship and erosion of democracy, what is? If the will of the people are not being listened to, what are?
Well, the will of the people is being listened to and blatantly ignored. I mean, they heard us loud and clear. Make no mistake about that, because we were talking before about how this is by design.
Mm-hmm.
So the blueprint is out there, the design is out there. This is going exactly as it has been planned. Similar to Project 2025. If anyone is surprised by any of the elements of Project 2025, they haven't been paying attention in the last couple of years, last couple of decades. And for those of us who are older, like we located, some of the things that had made it possible for us to get to something like Project 2025. The warning signs that the workers' movement, the unions, people have been protesting and fighting against for literally decades. But we've made some strides, we've made some advancements, but we have a long way to go, and we can't give up. And I think that's one of the things that that Keyshawn is inspired. He's, here you are, a younger generation. We've got, some different age groups here, and we're looking to you to, help coordinate the new movement. Like what's next? Not that we're gonna peace out on it, but we've got to come up with some other strategies while keeping some of the older strategies that did work.
Right. I think now it would be a good time to kind of focus in on some of the demands that DDL had during the water crisis since the very beginning. We'll be focusing on some of the demands, and then connecting that to kind of this larger Project 2025 and some different sections within Project 2025, what it calls for. Last week we did give a summary of Project 2025 and summaries of each of the 5 sections that Project 2025 has, what each specific section is saying, what is the propaganda that they're spreading, kind of, supporting family values. But what does supporting family values look like? Banning contraceptives and banning this and that. So kind of just going through that. So we did
eliminating no-fault divorce, which leads
exactly.
to higher incidence of domestic violence
and death.
Abolishing African American history out of the schools,
Right.
out of the curriculums, not just college, all of it. Prohibiting that. So there's a lot of things there. But before we get into our demands, and we did have demands, and we still do have demands. But I want us to talk about what was the lessons that we learned when we was fighting emergency manager, because we're gonna have to draw on those lessons to fight against Project 2025. And again, project we one of the things that we're proud of in the Democracy Defense League, that we put out a flyer, and I'll dig it up so they can post it. And the title of the flyer was "Vote While You Still Can." Vote while you still can, because we saw the emergency manager law being so imposing uh, dictatorship on the people, that we say, hell, we might not even be able to vote. And boy, does Project 2025 make that real. You may not even be able to vote. And so, even with the challenges of voter suppression and all this stuff, but I guess what, for me, and I'm not speaking for DDL in per se, but for me, it reminds me of a situation we had in the plant one time. And um, I was on in a maintenance department, and had to come in on a Sunday, and we were there checking out different things. And I was working with this older electrician named Jack, and we were going into the welding area, and something we saw that was very dangerous, and it was a safety hazard. And meanwhile, in the union, we're very guarded and jealous and holding on to, that's my job and that's your job. That's a very union thing. And I said, well, Jack, and they didn't have enough of that particular trade who could repair that to come in. They'd have to call them in. And Jack said, we gotta get that cow out the ditch. That's the way he said it. He said, you gotta get the cow out the ditch. We ain't got time for that's their job and this classification and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of feel like that's the case with all the demands and the vision and the hope for clean water, for affordable water rates, and all the things, the health care that we so desperately need as a result of the water crisis. But we got to get that cow out the ditch first. And that cow out the ditch is the threat to democracy and Project 2025. That's got to be our first line of attack.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't get rid of that, we'll still fight for clean water. We'll continue to fight for health care. We'll continue to fight for affordable health care. We'll continue to fight for extra funds for children who's impacted education. We'll continue to fight for that. But it'll make it so much more challenging. We have to go underground and all kind of stuff that we will have to do. And we got to get this expose of Project 2025 out there and defeat it by any means necessary. And that's by voting. We saw where there were some groups in other cities calling for a national day of protest against Project 2025, and we got to continue to educate the people about this. We got to get that out of our way, because that's a high hill to overcome, to fight for clean water, to fight for housing or anything else. So I wanted to share that, my perspective on that. But I also wanted to share that when we were fighting emergency manager law, so many people that you wouldn't think, people that you would not believe, entered into that fight. We had Democrats, and I'm going to clarify that too. We had Democrats, we had Republicans, we had Libertarians, we had Green Party, we had Socialists, we had Communists. We had some of everybody fighting against, because people were so shocked that our democracy, people around the state of Michigan in those little bedroom communities along the lakes, our Great Lakes, those communities, they saw what happened, that they went in and stole the property in Benton Harbor through emergency management. And people around the state were like, you ain't coming into our community taking our land. And so the fight for democracy was so intense and so shocking because, and I know others who went out and got signatures can tell you, when we put that signature in front of people and say, this is what the emergency manager law say, they can do this, that, and other, and people will say, they can't do that. This is what the law says, my friend. Mm-hmm. And we got signatures. You couldn't assume only certain people would sign that. But I want to say that with Project 2025, I'm quite sure, and we're seeing signs of it, that people from out of the woodworks and out of nooks and crannies of this country is going to come out and say, oh, no, 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 no. I think one example, and Laura, you can share this. We shared an article about them trying to eliminate the Department of Education and that little rural community. If you recall, you can share that.
Yeah, I mean, you had a community who wouldn't, you wouldn't necessarily think would be up in arms about privatization of maybe other assets or resources, but when it came to being stripped of being like a parent and having input into where your children were going to be spending their time, what kind of curriculum was going to be, offered to children, and even the idea of education as a right, that we need to be educated, that we need to have an educated populace, I think is kind of like instilled in us and ingrained. You could sort of take it for granted in the fact that it could just disappear. Have.
And you don't need you got Project 2025 as a almost 1,000-page document, but when they say they're going to eliminate Department of Education, those rural communities, they're like, hey, we don't have no private schools out here in the boonies. All we got is our little public school. So this issue is going to resonate far and wide. But in Michigan, I think we have a special responsibility to help generate and lead on fighting against this, because we've had a little experience, if you will, with dictatorship and with the government. Some of the differences is with the emergency manager, they selected which cities they wanted to impose dictatorship.
Right.
They didn't do it to the whole state. And this is a big difference, all of the people that resisted emergency manager were grassroots people. When I say they were Democrats, Republicans, and all that, but it wasn't their parties that did it. The Democratic Party did not help us. Do y'all hear what I'm saying? The Democratic Party did not help us get rid of emergency manager. But with Project 2025, they're grabbing onto that issue as a party, but, and excuse me for being cynical, they're grabbing onto it because they want to win the election. We're grabbing onto it because we don't want to live under fascism.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the paths will cross, but we had no help from the Democratic Party establishment. It was all grassroots. And I dare
in
say,
fact, they helped obstruct it. They were part of the problem.
Well,
in a lot of cases,
they did just enough. They voted against it, but they didn't fight to repeal it. And as a matter of fact, like you say, it's still on the books now. We got Democrat governors, Secretary of State, Democrat Attorney General, Democrat majority in the House, in the state Senate, state House. Why is that law still on the books?
So I just wanted to add a little bit of context to something Ms. Claire said about cities and communities in Michigan being cherry picked to be under an emergency manager.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because, and the Michigan Municipal League came out with a report about this. This was an artificially engineered revenue deficit that the state of Michigan did to cities like Flint, where they stole $6 billion from our communities to put us in a state where we would be able to be taken over and be under a financial emergency manager. $6 billion was stolen from our communities and distributed out. And I don't think there is another big example or something that, you know, illuminates that issue better than $6 billion. When I learned about that, that just blew my mind. That
Is that including the $4.5 billion that's particular to education?
I'm talking about in the 2011 debacle.
Are you speaking of the revenue sharing that the state withheld? I think the people need to hear exactly how that was stolen. Like
Okay.
you when you say this, when you put that number out, I think we want to know, how was it stolen? Was it stolen through freezing revenue sharing? We know Flint lost a lot of revenue sharing. Was that the main way they did it? I mean,
I
I'm just saying.
don't quote me. Don't take
Okay.
it for literal. But in my understanding of it, we all pay taxes, and the state of Michigan is kind of like the person who holds all of those taxes and stuff, and it gets distributed back out to cities and municipalities in order for them to do the things that they need to do. Um, and in my understanding, the state imposed new formulas so that um, what revenue cities should have got, what revenue cities like Flint should have got, they did not.
Right.
It became more
Gotcha.
inequitable,
Yeah.
right?
Gotcha.
So what had been historically established
Right.
was rearranged, and another component of that revenue sharing redistribution was that accounting practices were changed to make the prospective retirements and benefits of city and school employees part of the debt. So it made cities, it made municipalities and school districts look like they were in more debt, like from one year to the next, because they all of a sudden in one fell swoop they had to account for, okay, we're going to owe this in so many years to this many teachers, for
Mm.
examples, or here's the benefits that we're expected to have to pay,
Mhm.
moving out. And before that, it wasn't accounted. So it was some trickery with the books,
Okay.
and it was artificially, like you said, created because the situation hadn't changed from
Yeah.
one year to the other. And all of a sudden, municipalities and school districts were in financial debt.
Mhm.
Were being told that they were close to bankruptcy.
Yes. And no, go ahead. No,
And
I was just gonna say, all of that was um, the what what was the purpose of it? What was the intentions? Why did they do it? Because they're mean? Yes. But what was the motive behind the emergency manager, the theft of our revenue sharing, the freeze and de fund public school system, opening the door wide open to the private school industry? The Betsy DeVos situation, who is a big proponent of charter schools, and sadly, she's a native of Michigan, and she's a leading figure in dismantling public education. But what are some of the reasons why do we even have an emergency manager? Because there was uh, a drive to come into cities that had assets and hand those public assets over to private corporate interests, to hand over
And
public assets to private corporations. And that is the same, reading in between the lines, and you don't really have to do that with the Project 2025. It is a attempt and a momentum and movement on the part of corporate America and Wall Street America to come in and seize public assets and take outright control of the government. What? So this is some serious stuff.
so when you ask why, that was a pretty important question that we, from the very beginning, why is our water bad? Why can't we drink it? What is happening? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
There was a big why. And after, over the span of 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
we've been able to piece together some of the reasons why. Remember, this is by design. This has been carefully orchestrated.
Mm-hmm.
We have think tanks, like in Michigan, we have the Mackinac Center and the Betsy DeVos Family Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to piece together some of the motives and some of the things that have transpired over the past few years, few decades. But when we were going through it in 2014, we were just confused. Plus, we were being gaslighted. We were being told the water's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not discolored. It smells just fine. Go ahead and drink it. And I don't remember if it was you, Claire, who had the analogy that we've got like an 1,000-piece puzzle that just got dumped out on the table, and we're trying to like flip over the pieces and put all the pieces together.
That wasn't me, but it's very good.
All right. Well, you can have that. But what we've found, we've got frontline investigators, ProPublica. We have Dr. Louise Seamster at the University of Iowa, who wrote a book on Benton Harbor, Dr. Highsmith, who wrote Demolition Means Progress, and other scholars, journalists, who have documented some of the reasons why. One of the things that we did find out is that we had a disproportionate stake or claim in the Great Lakes, one of the largest freshwater water supplies in the world.
Absolutely.
And Flint, as a city, as a municipality, had a claim to that, which we no longer have.
Well,
and so we do not have the same claim that we had at the beginning of the
correct. I agree with that.
And that's one of the resources. You talked about privatizing public resources. Water was one of those resources. Education is one of the resources. Land. You talked about Benton Harbor. There was a public park that the Whirlpool Corporation was allowed to just have. A lot of resources were given away or sold for sometimes literally $1. And we've been able to piece together some of those reasons, but the whole picture still isn't very, very clear. But like I said, because a lot of this is kept in the dark and is kept secret. Now, compared to Project 2025, you have the Heritage Foundation, which is another think tank that has poured billions of dollars in resources into creating this so-called project, this agenda. And there's a lot of people working very, very hard. So I think one of the points that we talked about last week was that we may not have those resources. We don't have that think tank, but we've got other resources as communities, as activists, as having, each other. What are we going to do to, combat those things that we don't have?
And I want to pinpoint Project 2025 had a budget of $22 million.
Oh, I misspoke. I said billions.
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
getting
Yeah.
all excited. Yeah.
Well, I'm appreciating this conversation, and we're looking for that Flint social justice DNA to re-emerge, and it's kind of been we've been beat up so much. I think we kind of got we need a little R&R or something
Mhm.
because
Well, we've
but
been lead poisoned. We've been exposed to some environmental
but we still
risks.
got that social justice mindedness, and that's one of the things that it wasn't just that the workers in Flint uh, were victorious in the 1937 sit-down strike that contributed to the establishment of a vibrant middle class, and that spread around the world. But it was also their understanding of the society that we live in was raised in the course of that fight. They knew who the enemy was. Right now, we in Flint is like a circular firing squad. We
Ooh.
just shooting at whatever, and we got to get back to the what is we dealing with. We got to have a better social consciousness in order for us to fight our way out of this. Now, when the workers sat down and they knew General Motors, they knew the company. They said the company. They knew what their enemy was about and who it was, not in the physical, personal self, but as a corporate class of people.
Right.
They understood that was the enemy. And we got to get back to that. You know, when Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were murdered in the 60s, the civil rights workers that were heading down there to help with the civil rights movement, and they got stopped over and they killed them and threw them in the river. And Martin Luther King said, the question is not who killed them, the question is what killed them. And we got to get back into our whats, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to identify what we're dealing with in the sense of corporate power being imposed on the people and corporate hegemony and control. And once we get that, then we can outline strategies for fighting back. And so that's why, to me, and going back to that old little incident at work, and I'm up here. Now we gotta call when I'm at work and we ran into that situation. We gotta call in the da. And the older, wiser elder at the time was my elder. He said, "We don't have time for that. We gotta get that cow out the ditch." So the first line of defense, in order for us to pursue our just issues, clean water, ability to live, to be the beneficiaries of all these riches that this country got to offer. And you got people in the street, and we can't get up. One of the things the Democracy Defense League did decide, and I can speak for them in this aspect, we're not getting into this Democrat Republican stuff. We're getting into, we don't want the dismantling of democracy. Because if the Democrats was concerned about it, they would have got rid of Public Act 436. They haven't did it. They haven't defended us. They got elected on the basis that they would resolve the water situation. So we got to go back to what? The people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a large part of what Ms. Claire is raising up is the need for us to develop some class consciousness in order for us to be able to cooperate with one another. And I think that's something that's so scary in Flint. People think they're the cows. People think they are the others. You're one of us. You shouldn't be an operative of a certain foundation. You shouldn't be an operative of, okay, I won't get specific, but you should be with us. You shouldn't be with them thinking you're one of them, and you're not. And I think that is so scary, because there are people who make it an objective, whose whole purpose is to distract us away from our goals and our main points of, they're here to cause chaos, and we've got to put on our headphones and focus on the goal.
You know, when during the sit down strike, and I'm old enough that I got an opportunity to meet some of the original sit downers. You know, I was like in my 30s, they was in their 70s, and you know, most of them has passed on now. But one of the things they shared with us was down in Chevy in the Hole, when they got ready to shut down the plant down there. I can't remember which one. And they and the union had been organizing all for quite some time, and they were at the point they was ready to shut down the plant. So they had a big meeting in the cafeteria, and they said, the union organizers said, anybody who don't want to participate in the sit down strike, you can leave now. And a lot of people left. And the ones that stayed, they shut the plant down, locked the doors, and secured the plant until the strike was over. But we don't have such little simple thing. You know, people don't see, and today you can't find none of those people that left the plant and didn't participate. When the victory was won, they all was all of them was in the, I was in the city, you know, so that's how that go, you know. But
There's a Boondocks episode that shows one of the characters who
Yeah, the grandpa
the grandpa
lied about being in the civil rights movement. He was outside of the movement the whole entire time.
And he was like, I had to go get my raincoat. And so that's like a
but it would be so simple. The reason I brought that up, it would be so simple if we could say, okay, all of y'all that don't want to be a part of making life better for ourselves and our children, y'all leave now. I wish we had that, but we don't. We got people that's playing and pretending and diverting and obstructing, and they had that back then too. They had uh, 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 company snitches and all that kind of stuff that they had to deal with. But what I'm saying is, once we get our focus on what we're dealing with, and we agree on how we're going to begin to initiate the battle, and it's going to be a big battle, because with Project 2025, it's going to affect millions of people. And once we can help identify what we're dealing with and people get engaged, it's going to be easier to sift out the ones that's not. Right now it isn't, because I can I heard something on the radio today. I know it was a national talk radio, and they said something about Kim Worthy, and she was good and everything. So now I got to go home and write the radio station, the show, and say, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
For those who don't know, Kim Worthy was supposed to be the lead. Her and attorney Hamoud were the lead prosecutors in the criminal case that they blew in the Supreme Court. 9 Supreme Court, isn't it 9 on the Michigan Supreme Court as well? Is it 9 Supreme Court justices that threw the case out, threw their case out? Those Supreme Court justices don't even agree on the time of day, but they all unanimously agreed that one-man grand jury is not, we can't. So I'm just saying.
Well, I want to thank everybody for participating in this conversation today. If you left a comment, if you watched a little bit, I want to thank you. I want to thank Ms. Claire for coming on. I want to thank James Mayfield for hosting us. Also George Grundy.
Out of the mud.
Out of the mud. Y'all are doing an amazing job in
Mhm.
promoting conversations and people in our community who matter. And yeah, also want to thank my co-host Laura McIntyre. And hopefully we'll continue these conversations. We'll continue to build as a community some ways of resisting and some real action. We've got to take these conversations and turn them into actions. And yeah,
I would like to invite Miss Claire back.
absolutely.
She's like, I don't want to be here every week, but
Yeah.
it's like we
we need you here.
We've got more to talk about, though.
Yeah.
We've got more to talk about, and to link.
You guys,
I know that she can be virtual too, like with your phone or desktop computer.
So
laptop.
yep.
We
okay,
can send you a link wherever you at, Flint.
because I might be in the Bahamas. No,
Yeah,
I'm
we-
just kidding.
So we can send you a link and you can put your face and you can engage without having to actually come to the studio.
Because you're such a talented technician, Mr. Mayfield. That's
I'm
why.
figuring it out.
All right.
Yeah,
Figuring
no,
it
this
out.
is absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and so we were planning on doing this Beyond the Pale podcast every Wednesday around 3:30, give or take. And yeah, we're going to come back next week. Any idea of what we're going to talk about next week? Or is it just to be continued?
To be continued.
To
All
be
right.
continued.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And until next week,
Beyond the Pale, signing out.
peace.